Hello everyone, and welcome to this session of Let's Talk Cardano. So it's myself, Rena Mooney. I'm the Global Communications Director here at the Cardano Foundation, and I'm joined by Frederik Gregaard, our CEO, of course. So this session is divided into two parts, just so everyone knows. So the first session is with myself and Fred, and then the next session will be in the capable hands of Bullish Dumpling, who will discuss Sustainable Ada's Cardano Impact Report. So myself and Fred are here for 45 minutes. There'll be time at the end for about 10 minutes of Q&A, so make sure to drop your questions in. This session with Fred and I is going to, first of all, kind of take a retrospective look at the annual report that we launched this year. And then we're going to kind of talk about this year and what we've done and kind of looking forward to our tactical implementation plan. So Fred, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here today. Let's just kind of do a quick recap of the annual report. And, you know, this year, the annual report was an inaugural annual report, and it was divided into three sections: operational resilience, education, and adoption. And I think kind of let's take a quick look at the element of operational resilience, because it really focused on kind of what our role is around bolstering Cardano's technological resilience and preparing our infrastructure to be an enterprise critical technology. And kind of some of the pieces there, just to kind of recap for yourself, were the developer reporting, kind of our delegation to SVOs, the DAB, and kind of progress we've made on SIPs and Vassal hard fork. So, you know, a quick overview of that from last year's perspective.
Yeah, I think what's really important to pay attention to is that the Cardano protocol is growing and growing, and it's getting more and more mature. And the more people who makes a bet on Cardano and makes a bet and say, you know, we want to change the social systems of the world, we want to change the financial systems of the world, the more liability there is towards the technology and the infrastructure which they live on. So the big difference between sort of classical open source software systems where you download and compile and run it yourself, between a blockchain where everything is decentrally run, but it's all run on the same stack, is that you sort of increase this liability. And what we worked on and worked through last year was really ensuring that we had what was needed to contribute to ensure a robust and reliable and durable Cardano blockchain. And for that we needed to update a few things in terms of the SIPs processes. We needed to update a few things in terms of our teams. So we really set forward and said we need to have a team of site reliability engineers, also as a contribution to Voltaire, that we have as many entities as possible who looks at the network security, but also that we are getting ready to get into a situation that we can get much more feedback and receive much more pull requests in terms of how the network will be updated going forward and be much more reliable, predictable, and resilient for future implementations. So I think this was sort of a quite large epiphany, and also ensuring that it was not just us building it, but also that goes on to the stake pool operators. And it was one of the large reasons why we did that large, a side track at the Cardano Summit last year, where we said, we need to bring the stake pool operators into one room, really give them something valuable back, but also try and understand how we motivate them to get to a situation that they take way more responsibilities on the Cardano blockchain than maybe what was possible before. And as these toolings comes about, it's going to be really, really exciting to see how resilient you can really make a distributed technology.
Yeah, and then kind of the next element was obviously then looking at blockchain education, regulatory clarity. I think we did a lot last year. We were in Brussels, London, Singapore. It was a really exciting year. We also announced the launch of the Cardano education program, also our partnership with UZH, and just general attendance at global events. Kind of what were the highlights from last year from your perspective?
I think there was many highlights, right? But I think there was two things that really stood out to me, and maybe they're not highlights, but maybe it's just like epiphanies are sort of like, wow, what's happening here, right? The first one was a layer one blockchain as a public infrastructure is not necessarily regulated, at least not under sort of a financial umbrella. And we were just ensuring that we didn't have a Johari's window. So we were checking into the local regulators around the world. And what we found was a very mature discussion, specifically in Brussels, around saying, If it's on a blockchain, it's capital market. It must be regulated under capital markets regulation. And therefore we, and most of the players there were specific lobbying from some of the larger regulated players. They were saying, we are anyway regulated, so why not just regulate everything as securities or everything as security tokens, right? And then we came in and sort of in the last sort of mile and said, well, hold on a second. You will be missing 99% of the innovation on a blockchain if you think blockchain is only financial markets. Now, there is a lot of financial markets happening on blockchain right now, but as these things sort of mature, what we see is that, like with Veritree or United Nations Humanitarian Crisis Organization and supply chains and the ability for counterfeit materials like fabrics and stuff like that, you really see that this is not an industry play. This is all industries who will be affected. So I think this was a large thing. And then what we saw was that a lot of regulators who said, how do we learn this? How do we understand what the differences is by, from Bitcoin to a third generation blockchain who has the ability to have multiple representation of assets, not just financial assets, but also intellectual property right and data and so on. Multiple representations of identities and not just one identity scheme, but identity schemes who can help, the 2-3 billion people who don't have identity, but also things like legal entity identifiers and so on. And how can we actually sort of use the power of metadata and other things in a different way? So what we really saw was that there was actually a lack of high quality, free available education on third generation blockchains. And what we then did was we said, okay, should we do something just for Cardano, and we do certification on Cardano, and it's sort of like a centralized play, like a university or like an education platform, or should we do something for the world? And we decided we wanted to do something for the world, which meant that we actually had to build it ourselves, specifically the scripts, to ensure that we could release that under an open source license and ensure that if you are another blockchain and you want to upgrade your stakeholders or your community, or if you are from a university and you need new slides, new up-to-date material, or if you are working for a global multinational corporation and you want to have it in there, you had all of those options. And we would not be so tied on, whether it says, produced by Cardano Foundation or not, because the purpose is really to get general adoption on blockchains. And we do believe that the technology around Cardano and the community around Cardano is so strong that with a general adoption on blockchain, we will also benefit dramatically more of it than if we were trying to do a singularity play with no interoperability.
And actually, this kind of leads nicely onto our next section, which is, focusing on general adoption of blockchain. I know we kicked off a few partnerships last year. We continued others. We also looked at some open source tools. Last year, the open source team developed Kupo 2. We had the ecosystem survey. We continued our work with Veritree and Georgia government, Cardano ballot, forensic tools integration. So a lot going on last year regarding adoption. And I suppose I won't ask you what your highlights were, but, give us some overviews or some of your takeaways from last year.
Yeah, but I think the community today is already innovating really strongly in anything which is born digitally and dies digitally. So even though I'm still very much coming from financial markets and financial market infrastructure due to my past, I would like to say that's definitely not my highlights. My highlights is really where something is touching something physical, something tangible, like the agricultural project we're running in Georgia, where we suddenly finding ourselves in a situation that blockchain alone cannot stand. And it's not about two databases, it's actually about sensors, or it's about, connecting a real process, a production process, for instance, or with Veritree, where we suddenly saw that they were putting acidity sensors in the ground, wind sensors to measure, the trees, and capturing all of that, and then basically deploying that in interchangeable metadata on the blockchain. So you really, you're pressing the power of what Cardano can do, which basically is this idea that you have non-fungible tokens, where part of it is really non-fungible. It cannot really change. It's very dedicated. And a part of it, can change, right? Which means that when you have sensors, which is updating the token, this can actually be captured as a part of an Oracle process and so on. And I think this is extremely powerful. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that coming this year. And I know that you wanted to speak about that also in the next sort of session, but I think that's sort of some of the highlights is really when you really see that blockchain is bridging with other technologies to be really tangible and really touch society, not just digitally in sort of Web3, but really out there.
And I think, we looked at the past, but I think now let's kind of bring it into this year. And so this year, we've obviously had our tactical implementation plan, and kind of the key points across this. You maybe tell us a little bit about the tactical implementation plan for the foundation, and then we can maybe deep dive into some of the key elements of it.
Yeah, so sometimes less is more. And what we were seeing as the Cardano Foundation was really starting to contribute to the global Cardano ecosystem was we saw that we need to ensure that when we look back, there are certain things we want to achieve, and they are non-negotiable. And we then basically defined 6 boxes or 6 sort of delivery tracks where we said this is the delivery tracks where it's measurable. We can actually track it on the blockchain, right? That means that, a third party will be able to verify something. Not all of it is trackable on the blockchain, but a big chunk of it is trackable on the blockchain or trackable through other technologies, right? So that means that, as an outsider, you could actually go in and verify, where have we moved the needle? And I think this was extremely important. And those 6 boxes is really Cardano mainnet support, operations, and monitoring. It's Voltaire, because this is really the phase where Cardano is facing right now. There's this notion that we're moving to, even though we are the most decentralized blockchain, we're moving to an even more decentralized governance system, and we need to find out what that looks like and how does the transition work. Then it's about education and addressing the regulatory uncertainty. And then it's about what we call technical enablers, growth enablers, and open source.
And so can you tell me a little bit more about the Cardano mainnet support and kind of how we're helping to optimize towards the next era of Cardano?
Yeah, so as you saw in the annual report, we were already moving strong, and we were starting to hire a team of site reliability engineers and so forth. And what we've done right now is we actually deployed nodes in all the different continents, so listening nodes, and we are also working together with some of the data aggregators and the stake pool operators. So we have an operators call right now with over 800 stake pool operators. And what we basically build is we build a network monitoring tool to really look at the health of the network, but also to explore different things like block propagation and how the nodes are exploring each other as we move to almost P2P and so on. And during that process, we actually were able to find several possibilities for optimizing Cardano's networking layer. And we're actually also even to contribute to basically write suggestions and pull requests to that, which was accepted. So basically, I'm sort of very proud to say that we are now in a situation where there is not just one entity and not just 2 entities, but there's multiple entities who's looking at the network health, but also are able to do bug finding and other things. We also continued our bug bounty program. So I think that's also very important, right? So we do run a bug bounty program, and we have different assets in that. And we are this year looking actually at changing provider, because we think that the provider we have right now is really good, but we want to have somebody who's just a notch deeper into decentralized distributed architecture in terms of their reach. But through the bug bounty program, we are constantly sort of testing different assets as well.
Yeah, and then I think nice lead on from this is the technical enablers. So I think we have some interesting news under the technical enablers box.
Yeah, that's really fresh off the press. I mean, there's going to be a lot more happening there, right? But what we basically said, is that digital identifiers, verified credential, and metadata tools are some of the things which we really need to create some tooling for. And what that would allow is a complete different cost of different use cases, specifically in the physical world. Now, where we are today is that by 1st of July, we will be taking over a lot of the components from the address tier stack. So more specifically, this is the GraphQL, the Rosetta, the enterprise backend wallet, DB Sync, etc. So this is tools which specifically exchanges is relying a lot on. And what we're going to do with those tools, you can already go into our GitHub repository and you can see the change has been made from IoT to us, is that we wanted to contribute to Voltaire in terms of decentralization, also of tooling. But we also anyway are the sort of the anchor point to many exchanges and larger dApps in terms of first level support and so on. And we feel we can take these products and move them towards a more open source environment. So not open source just in terms of the repos, that they are open and available, but really also in the social systems that will encourage developers from exchanges and from banks and application developers who's using that part of the stack to basically contribute not just to the backlog of it, but also they can write code, and we will reach out to them and build sort of technical steer codes and around that. So it's really around on one hand a contribution to Voltaire, and on the other hand also really pushing forward towards let's say a more fluent open source strategy, where we can really start testing some of those hypotheses we have around how blockchain and open source can merge and make a happy marriage.
Yeah, and I think this open source has been our open source teams have been quite busy this year. I know we had obviously the launch of or the delivery of Aiken, the new programming language and toolkit for developing smart contracts. Can you tell me a little bit more about that from this year?
Yeah, so we've been a contributor to the Aiken Lang project, right? And I think we're also contributing to a lot of other projects, right? But I think the real trick here is not so much that Aiken seems to be a very, very fast and very reliable, but also a very cost-efficient smart contracting language. It works really perfectly on Cardano, and we've been mainly contributing to that. But the whole idea is that by us sort of exploring this and exploring what it really means, not just to build open source, but also to run open source and deploy open source and interact with that. What you really need to get to is you need to get to commercial interest in that. So it's about how do you merge the commercial interest and the feature request and their business models with the requirements of and the problem solving from the engineers, and how you start doing more than just engineering. So that also means marketing and licensing and even legal work and other things which really is needed to safeguard and keep pushing open source projects. So that is really interesting, and I think creating strong communities around open source software fundamentals is really something I do think not just Cardano should be doing, but all blockchains should be doing.
Yeah. I think, and as well, education is so important as a component part of this, and I suppose this is why obviously this year we've launched the Cardano Alpha program. There's a kind of layers to it, and the education program has been quite successful to date. Can you tell us a little bit more about this and kind of how the team are getting on with that?
So on the education side, right? So I think first of all, it's not just about education or in general, right? As I mentioned earlier, this is much more specific. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to do two things. First of all, we wanted to ensure that regulators, policymakers, and others who is a part of the global discussion about regulation of blockchain, distributed ledger technology, and capital markets, and so on, that they actually have a repository and a place where they can go and understand what are we actually going to regulate, and what does that mean in terms of job creation and attractiveness as a market, and what kind of industries are we actually touching? So it's the right regulators who's touching it, and not just one side of the regulation. Mm-hmm. So we are a very large advocate for principle-based regulation, and as the community probably have seen, and we started to answer more public consultations. So before we were sort of a little bit more, I would say we were still active, but we were not sharing it that openly. And now we've been very strongly advocating and not just writing answers to public consultations, but also sharing those. And we also, co-signed certain letters and so forth in that area. The other part was we said, we are just the Cardano Foundation. What do we know about education? So what was important for us was that we not just went into a cave and built an educational program, but we actually had a feedback loop around that. So we launched what's called the Alpha test, which we announced at the summit last year. And we had several hundred people through that, and we received a lot of valuable feedback. And we saw there was actually a quite high completion rate compared to other free high quality projects in education. And we're now in the middle of what we call the beta version as well. And we found a few places to optimize, and we are on track by the end of the year to be launching what we call the Cardano Education Module 1 and 2, which basically takes you from more or less zero blockchain knowledge up to so much blockchain knowledge that you can do something meaningful with the blockchain. Now, that doesn't mean that this is not for engineers, that will come later, right? But this is really for business people, it's for lawyers, policymakers, it's for, people who's been, for years thinking about, oh, there's this thing called blockchain. Is it really just cryptocurrencies, and what does it do and what doesn't it do? So it really takes you from a basic understanding of third generation blockchains to give you the ability to download the Cardano blockchain and deploy an NFT or do something meaningful on the blockchain, so you can start getting your hands dirty and bring that back into whatever industry and business you are in today. Yeah. And then what we're going to have on the background of that is, because we do respect that people have day jobs, it's not all who work full-time in blockchain, is that we're building a certification program on the back of that. So if you need to have a certification to show your HR department or something like that, that it was valuable to take 20 hours out of your time to learn blockchain, you can even show that certification to your HR department. And obviously this certification will be on the Cardano blockchain, and it will be anchoring in with a third-party verifier using verified credentials and digital identity. So again, this is a part where we want to give back to the community some containers and tooling which people can then use to think up other cool stuff to build and deploy in Cardano.
Yeah, so if anyone has any family or friends that are constantly asking you what blockchain is, definitely send them in that direction. It'll help them. I've completed the course myself, and it's excellent. And then, looking over to Voltaire, I think it'd be remiss not to kind of cover this. It's also one of our 6 boxes. We had the SPO poll this year. We also had 1694 workshops. I'd love to hear a little bit more about kind of the SPO poll. I think it's a really, really important element of this, the Voltaire stream.
Yeah, so I think we've done quite a few contributions to Voltaire, and one of the things we wanted to really show was that there is different stakeholder groups on Cardano at any given time, and they all have different sort of agendas and different ways to optimize towards. But one stakeholder group which is particularly near and dear to our heart is the stake pool operators. So we were looking at saying, okay, so we do have something as beautiful as a blockchain and cryptographic primitives. So can it really be that we cannot do an on-chain vote on Cardano today? And of course you can do an on-chain vote. So what we basically set forward to do is that what could be meaningful? And when you look at sort of Voltaire and learning about, what it means to participate in a public democracy, we felt that, protocol parameters and stake pool operators is a very important thing. So these protocol parameters is one of the unique things about Cardano, which allows you to optimize Cardano towards the future. So that Cardano always would be relevant in terms of incentives, in terms of optimization and so on in the future. But who takes what decision and why? So what we did is, from the Cardano Foundation, we basically made a roadmap which said, how do we use the existing tooling as much as possible to do an on-chain vote? And what we actually had to do is we looked into when you run a stake pool, not always, but nearly always, you use something called the command line interface. So this might be for many people a bit too much coding, right? But what it basically does is it allows you to interact with the node and allows you to write different commands. And what's beautiful about a stake pool is that they're all registered through a certificate. That's one of the very special things on Cardano, that the stake pool operators have a specific certificate, which not only says that, hey, I want to be operating a stake pool, but it also talks about their setup and so on, and that gives them a unique ID. Think about it as a digital ID. So that means we had a digital ID. So we had a way of verifying people. We had something which allowed them to cast a vote. So thinking about a user experience. Now the user experience through a command line interface is of course a little bit challenging, but for stake pool operators, we thought with a couple of education sessions, we could get quite far. Now the problem is that the command line interface was not made for that. So what we had to do is we actually had to write some code in Haskell and upload that and get IOG's team, who maintains the CLI, to basically run that through the Q&A and accept that into the main code base. So we went and did that, and then we had several sessions with stake pool operators around, what are we trying to do, but also teaching them about this and also enlightening them that, the question in this case, it was the min pool fee and K we wanted to have a vote about. Why does that matter? But also how difficult it actually is to formulate the right question, because how you formulate the question is actually an art in democracy. And you have to be really careful about when you start thinking about that. And that was a fantastic exercise for the Cardano Foundation. We used months in trying to formulate those kind of questions. And it really sparked a huge debate on Twitter and in many forums about why we formulated like that, and was this the right parameters and so on. But for us, what was important was this ability to cast an on-chain vote. So then the voting opened up, and what we saw was that over 700 stake pools actually participated in that. We could track that exactly due to the digital identity, right? And what we saw is that represented more than 40% of all staked ADA, which I actually think is better than many democracies, because if you think in a democracy today, it's actually quite rare that you have like a huge participation, over 50% of the population and so on. So over 40% of all staked data, I thought was a really good thing. Now then, what we did is we asked the community, dear community, can you help us? Can you show to everybody what stake pools said what? And that meant that if you were staking to a stake pool and they were sort of saying, we want to have K to 1,000 and we want to have the min pool there, you could then disagree with them by basically unstaking your ADA and stake it with somebody else. So that gave you actually an opportunity to basically have a 2-week period where you could move your ADA to be more aligned with the sort of let's call the stake pool operator, a little bit like a politician. And this is sort of the precursor for what we think about as delegated representatives. So this allows us to learn a lot about delegated representatives and about, do people act differently when they're suddenly identified? Because, you could see exactly how people voted, in this case, the stake pool operators, which means that the stake pool operators are suddenly public and they have to have a public opinion, which some people actually did not think was, very fun. So this gave us some really good learnings around some of the feedback we could then put back into CIP 1694 and back into the workshops around CIP 1694 and the workshop we orchestrated in Zug, but we participated in multiple more, and we were allowed to really think some of those things through. And I think with things that's so big as Voltaire, I think incremental learnings are really important, and learning together with the participants in your democracy is really important. And everything changes when it becomes real. So when you talk about something is one thing, but when you actually have to do it, and it has a consequence, you see that there's a learning curve there, and suddenly your view might change, right? So that's some of the learnings and some of the things we had around that process. Yeah, and again, I want to highlight, this was not so much about K or the min pool. This was really about the process. Yeah.
And I suppose, do you want to tell us a little bit more about, the workshop in Zug? There's been a lot of workshops related to CIP 1694, and the latest one I think was in June in Zug, and there's one in Japan I think recently as well. A little bit more about kind of what the learnings from that as well, and the learnings from the workshops.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really hard to take, like a full day workshop and talk about that in 5 minutes. I think what's really important and what we really took out of those workshops is the diversity of opinion, but also the combined knowledge of the community. And we had people there from professional politicians to academic professors to governance experts to hardcore Haskell developers to ADA holders, and even people who doesn't belong in our ecosystem, who's associated to other blockchains, showed up to get learnings, but also contribute to what could be the optimal way of doing this. And so I think that was very important. And the other thing I think was very important is that you cannot just flip a switch and then everything is you vote about everything, and if you don't get over a certain threshold, you don't get anywhere. Then you might actually end up in a situation that the Cardano blockchain doesn't grow. So I think getting these incentives and getting those sort of fractions and bicameral or even tricameral model, getting that right is really important. And it also led into the question sort of what would the foundation's role be so after CIP 1694? Because you got to ask yourself a little bit, so when we have full Voltaire rolling out, and the whole thing is blossoming, what is the foundation then going to do? And we have a 5-year plan around where we've identified certain topics, which is either very expensive, or there's a high liability, or you just can't earn money on it currently, which is things we sort of naturally tend to solve. So this is like public bridges and sewage systems and internet connectivity and those kind of things, which really is needed to live in a city. And if you're a blockchain citizen, you need some of that to have a meaningful appearance. But as you probably also saw in the last 12 months, we changed our approach from being sort of not very vocal to be more and more vocal about what we think is the right way. And I think, whether we will become a delegated representative is still an open question. But I think what we definitely want to show is that, we do have a view and we do have an opinion, and we are willing to discuss that and articulate that, but we're also willing to be accountable towards that. And that's also why we've been voting in Catalyst for the themes. And that's why we also did the SPO, and so forth, right? We think you have to be an active participant of the ecosystem. And you need to stand for something. And I think that's what we really are starting to see the Cardano Foundation is doing.
Yes, and speaking of active citizens, if anyone has any questions, make sure to drop them into the question and answer box, because I'll be starting to ask Fred some questions in about 5 minutes, and I can just see about 2 in there. So any more questions, make sure to drop them in there. In the meantime, though, Fred, so the final, I suppose, box in the tactical implementation plan is, of course, last but not least, growth enablers, of which a big component part is the summit, which is coming up on the 2nd to the 4th of November. This is the second time the foundation will be hosting this, and this time, of course, in Dubai. It'll be an exciting event.
Yeah. I'm really, really excited about the Cardano Summit, and I'm really sad that we haven't sort of been announcing more about what's going to go on there, right? But I think what's really happening right now is that as we are still in the bear market, we see that one of the places where a lot of things is happening is Dubai. So Dubai has changed the regulatory framework. Dubai has attracted a lot of fintech companies and blockchain companies, and they actually have a blockchain strategy, which is about how do they, run more or less whole Dubai on a blockchain or blockchains. And there's a notion about smart cities and the ability to sort of live in a blockchain-based economy is something which I think a lot of the Cardano ecosystem can benefit from, because it means that a lot of the things I'm seeing people are building and exploring with, we will give them the opportunity to go to Dubai and meet local representatives from government, local representatives from politicians, local representatives from liquidity providers and large projects, where we really have a situation where Cardano builders and companies can basically meet the people who have a direct need and is doing RFPs and doing investments directly in that area. So I think outside all the other things we had last year in Lausanne, what you were going to have this time is much more matchmaking between the need for blockchain and the people who can satisfy that need for blockchain. And I think that's really special, and I'm really looking forward to being on the ground there in Dubai and seeing how Cardano projects is getting fantastic opportunities, not just in Dubai and UAE, but also in Africa and in that part of the world. There is obviously going to be other blockchains there as well. As last year, we invited representatives and senior representatives from other blockchains. There's going to be normal enterprises as well, who are sort of starting to bid on blockchain as well. But I think sort of this local need for blockchain combined with the experts in the world's best blockchain on Cardano is going to be a fantastic opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we will move on to the questions and answers now, unless there's anything else that you want to add, Fred, before we close out. And then there's a few more questions actually popping in here. But anything you want to kind of say as a final words?
No, thank you for the opportunity of having me in here and talking about some of the things we do to make Cardano more inclusive and a better area to grow in. Yeah. And frankly speaking, I said that the other day I was at the 0.0 forum where there was 1,300 policymakers, regulators, central bankers, and industry there. So we had the opportunity to meet with the SEC and the CFTC and MAS and all the people who really shape regulation today, but also large enterprises betting on it. Is when we governance and governance specifically on publicly distributed blockchains is becoming a very, very important thing. And to a strange way, I'm extremely, as happy as I can be that we are in a bear market and we can solve those big problems right now, because it's always good to build and deploy in the bear market. And I'm getting really, really, I'm seeing some light at the end of the tunnel, and I'm very positive towards, where we're going, because when we look at the architectural stack and when we look at the maturity of Cardano, there's a lot of these players who's finding us very, very interesting.
Yeah. So moving on to kind of questions and answers. So you've actually kind of touched on this one already. So people talk a lot about smart cities. How do you think blockchain can help there? If you want to give even a few more words on that, and we'll keep it short because we've only a few minutes left.
Yeah, I think large language models like ChatGPT and other is basically making it even cheaper than it was before to spread false information and false words, and it's basically increasing fraud and those kind of things. And what you need to get to is a computational layer you can verify, and that's what a blockchain really does really well. And when you're thinking about a smart city where these things, and you have maybe some AI or some other kind of technologies built into it, what you want to have is some safeguards, and you want to have some parameters which you can operate within. And I think, in many aspects, a blockchain is the best foundation you can have between the raw data and the, AI-based models. It's no secret that I like computational models better than large language models, right? But both fits extremely well on a blockchain. So I think actually the AI is going to increase the adoption of blockchain, specifically in critical infrastructure like a smart city.
Cool. So how do you perceive the evolving role of the Cardano Foundation within the ecosystem following the implementation of SIP 1694?
Oh, I think I answered a little bit about that before, potentially, right? But I think, whether we become a delegated representative, yes or no, we haven't decided yet. But I think what's really important is that there's a lot of things who needs to still be built, which is not necessarily attractive to build a business model for. And so I think about the Cardano Foundation as being more the guardians of the core technology stack, not just the blockchain, but also all the associated tooling which is needed to keep the cost of implementation low for the people who have business models on top. So when we start thinking about certification and standards and synchronization tools and so on, that's also one of the areas why where we accepted to take over some of the address tier components, right? I really see that that's a place for the Cardano Foundation. The other part is Cardano is complicated, right? And there's different stake group holders around there. And we have the little bit of luxury of being non-for-profit, which means that we are not commercially incentivized, which means we can fight the long time access. So when we look at all the different protocol parameters, including but not exclusively, how you interact with regulators and policymakers and fit into that. So how do you optimize towards having a fully functional blockchain, which is very operation resilient, but is also publicly acceptable for policymakers and regulators? I think the Cardano Foundation is going to play a big role in that journey for the years to come.
Perfect. So there is one really great question here, but I'm going to paraphrase it, so bear with me for a moment. So Fred, you were obviously at the 0.0 forum last week, and you actually were part of a roundtable on climate. And one of the questions here is the foundation strategy for encouraging and nurturing initiatives aimed at climate change and sustainability. What are we doing in this area? And I think, you've talked to some really, really interesting people while at 0.0 along this topic. And yeah.
Well, I do think that sort of, when I look ahead, and sometimes it's good to look ahead and then work backwards, right? I think in 12 months from now, what we're all going to speak about is scope 3 emissions. We're not going to speak so much about scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, but it's really about scope 3 emissions and how that relates to tracking on a blockchain. Because the blockchain, what it really does, it makes it incredibly transparent what you do. And that might be very good and it might be very bad. So one of the discussions I had was, for instance, about Bitcoin and discussing that together with some of the people who actually created the Bitcoin electricity index. And there were some very large institutions, I won't mention the names here, right, who was very much saying, we need to change Bitcoin. And I was like, but why? This doesn't make any sense to me. You now have a data point and you see exactly what it means in terms of electricity consumption. but what is your reference data points? When you look into like, the world's largest banks, or if you look into multinational, corporations, right? What kind of transparency do you have around their electricity consumption and how they're optimized? Do you even see what they actually use? So is it green energy, and what about greenwashing, right? So I think my first point is really, we're going to move towards scope 3 emissions. I think blockchain is going to be the foundation for how you measure those things. And I'm really proud that Cardano is such a green blockchain. And I do think that this is going to power us forward. The next thing is decentralization. And I think specifically when you look into the COP has had three difficult years, right? Where they couldn't really agree on anything. But the Article 6.2 really allows you to offset against each other, right? So I think you're going to see much more collaboration and agreements between different sort of companies directly across borders and across nation states and so on, actually starting to do bilateral agreements. And that means that we couldn't solve it centralized through COP. What are we going to see in terms of a decentralized solving of some of those problems? And here I think, again, the blockchain has this ability of collaboration asymmetry, meaning that you can, normally if you're a small person, you don't trust a big guy, but because you can lock in the rules in smart contracting and through permissionless blockchains, you might have an opportunity here to basically automate and really verify some of those bilateral agreements and maybe even scale that. So that would be sort of my wish box, that we can move in that direction. But I do think that even though the Cardano might not be the leader in this, we will definitely follow that trend, and we will definitely do what we can to enable that. Because we have some of the right tools and we have the right foundation to do so with our Ouroboros and our consensus algorithm proven with an extended UTXO setup.
I'm going to go for one last question, and then I suppose we better close it out. And this may not be necessarily directed at you, but I think it's a good question. As I saw, the foundation had a masterclass in London. Will you be doing more like these and in some other cities?
I certainly hope so, because I had a lot of fun there. And it was great to meet the community, and it was great to meet also another community which I don't meet so often, was the city of London and the financial system there. So yeah, no, I'm certainly hoping we're doing that, and we're definitely doing something around the summit as well when we're anyway with boots on the ground, and we just did something similar also here in Zurich and Zug. So yeah, I certainly hope so. And if not, if you see that we are in the area due to an event or something, feel free to reach out to us and ask if we can, come by and teach in a class, or if you have, an after-hour work for a big law firm or wherever you work, and you see we're anywhere in the area, let's save some carbon footprint on the flying. But if we're anywhere in the area, let's see if we can't do an after-hour or something. Very open for that, yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Look, I think we'll close it out. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining today. It was really great. And I think we will hand over to Bullish Dumpling soon. Okay, thank you. Bye.
Right. Thank you, everyone, for coming to today's session. We are talking about making impact on chain, sustainability, social empowerment, a lot of interesting things. We are going to have 45 minutes for today's session, so it's going to be very efficient. 3 parts of this conversation. The first part, we're going to talk a little bit about the Cardano Impact Report. Raz is going to give us more insight about why that matters and what are some of the most important points. And then it's the highlight of today's show. We have some of the most exciting RealFi projects here with us. Greg, Mickey, Cole, from Empower, WMT, and Sustainable ADA. So we're going to ask them about how their projects are driving impact and improving people's lives. Finally, we have 15 minutes for you to ask your questions. So not to sound too ominous, but if you waffle or ramble when you're asking questions, then it's not going to be a good look. So be prepared. You have about 30 minutes to be prepared, so I'm sure you can do that. So let's get started. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Raz, tell us about the Cardano Impact Report, what it is, and why should we care?
Thank you, Dumpling. And first off, just want to say how much of an honor and privilege it is to share the room with such esteemed change makers. I saw a question go into the chat, and I believe this could answer it straight off. The whole impetus of the Cardano Impact Report. But first off, here at Sustainable ADA, we believe that Cardano is making a step towards a world where new mechanisms of decentralized cooperation and consensus can start to replace the cheap at all costs and business as usual structures that are degrading the world we live in. And to quote Dr. Mihaela Ulieru, former head of strategic impact at Input Output and current chief AI alchemist at SingularityNet, who has written the foreword to our Cardano Impact Report. For those who are not in the Cardano community, this report is not just about Cardano. This is about an awakening to the wider global issues we face today, and a clear call to action that our time has come to address these issues head on. The report offers a path forward towards a sustainable and equitable future. By engaging with the innovative projects and initiatives presented here, you can also contribute to positive change and find solutions to the complex issues that burden our world. And at a minimum, get inspiration to create your own projects wherever you are in the world, and you can count on our community to guide you. Now, the Cardano Impact Report is the first of its kind. It's a comprehensive publication that aims to capture and showcase the positive impact generated by the Cardano community. It's a window into this universe of positive social change, a map, a compass, and a guide for people who are looking for inspiration and are looking for alternatives to the systems that are failing the masses. We've designed it as a book NFT to leverage the unique features of blockchain technology, ensuring authenticity, transparency, and immutability of the content. And the report begins with Dr. Ulieru's foreword and is followed by our Sustainable Aid introduction, where we give an overview of the global status quo, the role of Web3 in challenging the status quo, and more insights into Web3 and what it is in practice. The report then goes on to be broken down into 8 different chapters, which Cole, my friend and co-founder at Sustainable Aid, will tell you more about.
As Raz said, the book's broken down into 8 different chapters, and the first chapter looks at values, blockchain, and positive impact, introducing concepts of impact, values, sustainability, and the importance of blockchain technology, and how it connects to sustainability and impact. Chapter 2 dives into Cardano and sustainability. Here we explore how Cardano aligns with the Sustainable Development Goals and delve into impact investing, measurement verification, and reporting, and look at ESG in the crypto space. Chapter 3 focuses on environmental impact. Here we examine Cardano's environmental impact use cases and its effort to drive positive change. Chapter 4 looks at social impact. Here we discuss social impact and showcase the various projects in the ecosystem helping lead the social impact journey. In Chapter 5, we look at Cardano and how it's trailblazing new models of governance. Here we explore Cardano's innovative governance models, including decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs, and the Project Catalyst community. Chapter 6 looks at impactful stake pools and alliances. Here we highlight the impactful stake pools and alliances in the community that are contributing to Cardano's sustainability. We also include those running on renewable energies. We also, in Chapter 7, look at the NFT for Good community. Here we explore the significance of NFTs, key marketplaces that are driving adoption, NFT projects for social good, and emphasizing how Cardano reduces barrier to enter the space. The final chapter, our conclusion, where we close on connecting the dots and wrap up the golden thread that has weaved through the report.
Thank you, Raz. Thank you, Cole. Yeah, thank you for giving the brief introduction. So I have a rather spicy question. Some of the critics of sustainability or ESG topics, they might say it's a feel-good metric. Sometimes it could feel quite hollow. So if someone is interested in reading about this impact report, is there going to be specific numbers, specific measurements, and even success stories that people can read on?
I love spicy food dumplings, so thank you for that question. And 100%, you know, this is why we created the Cardano Impact Report, actually. And Fred touched upon it with talk of greenwashing. And at the end of the day, you know, it's safe to say that today we live in both what we could consider the best and the worst of times. There were forest fires recently in Canada, you know, there's cars actually burning down the road from my home in Paris, given recent events. The planet is heating up to unprecedented levels and the world is on fire. Scientists have warned of global warming. Earth is getting so hot that temperatures in about a decade will probably blow past the level of warming that world leaders so far have been unable to solve. And according to the United Nations, it's a code red for humanity. However, it's not all doom and gloom, and there are solutions that exist today. Rina mentioned about, if you have friends and family, tell them about the education course at CF. And this is something that really resonates with me because I was teaching at the university here in Paris on smart cities and sustainability. And given my interest in tech for good, I realized there was a gap in resources to actually learn about what's happening today, how it's improving lives on the ground, and how this isn't just a utopic vision, this is happening. So going back to fast forwarding to the present moment, we have put together all of the research that's not just within the Cardano ecosystem in the global stage, up-to-date statistics. We've covered industries to critically evaluate essentially what are the shortcomings. Why are we in a situation where we have trillions of dollars in the world that are not at the moment being deployed to where it's most needed? And so the Cardano Impact Report plays a crucial role in highlighting and celebrating the social and environmental solutions and outcomes achieved by the Cardano community. It serves as a testament to the transformative power of blockchain technology, its potential to drive positive change in various sectors, including not just finance, but governance, social impact, and sustainability. And you mentioned about this feel-good factor. And at the end of the day, right, like we can talk all we want about like SDG goals and talk, but from talk, we need action. And to have action, you need to have inspiration, you need to have hope. Otherwise you just stay in your chair, right? And you think someone else would do it. And, going back to what Fred said about like not being able, can't flip the switch, we can flip the script. And, if we stand for something, and as I think all of us here agree, like Cardano and its community are here because we all stand for something. We have something in common, this crazy belief that we can build a better world, right? And smart cities are one piece of the puzzle, and blockchain is one piece of the puzzle in a wider net of tech for good. So it's not all about just one solution, and it can't be, for such a global stage. And Cole, to pass it over to you, how do the goals of our report translate into the real world?
Before Cole takes over quickly, we have very limited time, so I will ask Cole to be quite brief so we can progress to talking to our panelists. Thank you, Cole.
Of course, definitely. Yeah, I'll be super brief. So yeah, the goals for the report, the primary goal of the impact report was to provide a comprehensive overview of the value, identity, impact created by the Cardano ecosystem, connects the dots to global issues that concern us all, and provide us with a compass, map, and guide for us to be able to solve the urgent challenges of our time. For our next steps with the report, we're looking to create a repository of success stories. The impact report aims to compile a collection of success stories, case studies, and best practices from the Cardano community. Helping share these experiences, it seeks to inspire, empower, and leverage the blockchain technology for positive impact. We're building a comprehensive knowledge base. The impact report serves as a valuable resource for researchers, policymakers, and industry professionals interested in understanding the potential of impact in blockchain technology. Ultimately, we're driving positive change and impact from bottom up and top down.
Thank you both. Now, I can't wait to hear from Mickey and Greg. We had some conversations, we had Twitter spaces. Speaking of doing real work, being hands-on, being on the ground, I want to hear from you guys. Tell us how you are driving impact. How are you improving people's lives? What are some of the challenges and even stories? Please tell us. Mickey, do you want to start? And then we go to Greg.
Sure. Building telecoms network is typically not very sustainable, but the outcome of a telecom network is sustainable. Reducing people's time to travel is absolutely essential. We build telecom networks in both emerging countries and in modern worlds where this kind of sustainability is needed. For example, in East Africa, where we have several deployments, we're using solar And then we're using second life batteries from the revolution in China, and we're bringing those over and repurposing those. There's a lot of other things as well, like e-waste, right? It's massive. If you think about people changing their devices on a regular basis, you've got to create good recycling programs. And then there's the whole green path all the way through. We have much better people on our team than me to speak about this kind of sustainability. For example, Enrique and Andrew Soper, they run that division in our company and are very connected to making sure that wherever we can, our footprint is incredibly sustainable.
Greg.
Yeah, I mean, we're also faced with the challenge that if we are successful in delivering the homes, the 50 million homes that represent the backlog in Africa, and we do it in environmentally unfriendly ways, or in ways that, say, housing was built in China, we're only going to exacerbate the challenges that were touched on in the report. So really at the forefront of what we're trying to do is find climate smart solutions. And also for us, climate smart isn't only the carbon footprint of the homes, although that is a big consideration. It's also the climate resilience. A place like Mozambique, which is obviously one of our test markets, and Beira in particular is one of the most climate impacted places on Earth. Just this last cyclone season, they had Cyclone Freddy, which was the most powerful cyclone to hit the continent ever. And so when one thinks about climate smart, we also need to think climate resilient. How do we build homes that when a cyclone does blow through, because it is going to, the reality of climate change has been such that our homes are going to have to withstand these kinds of natural disasters. How do we make sure that the homes can withstand that? Because it goes without saying, not only is there a huge impact on somebody's life, not only their home, not only if they've had to live through a cyclone, but their home is destroyed, there's also a double carbon footprint because they need to rebuild the house. That means more capital, more building materials, etc. And unfortunately, that's what often happens in these markets where people build homes that are self-built without the right building materials. They save up, they're actually able to build themselves a home, the cyclone comes through and that is destroyed. So we look at climate resilience as part of our kind of climate smart approach. And we also look at our building materials. I mean, some of the stuff that we've done is pilot Africa's first affordable hempcrete house, which is actually CO2 negative. And that was done in collaboration with the Dutch government. And it's a pilot. We obviously have now tenants living in those. We're seeing how they withstand things like the weather, climate that we've mentioned. So as a base level, all our homes need to be built, as climate resilient, then of course with climate smart material. And we are also trying to pilot new building methods that hopefully, if successful, can actually take carbon out of the environment rather than contribute to the crisis that we're currently experiencing.
So we're talking about impact, and from my personal view, impact is not limited to sustainability and environmentally friendly. So I might sound like a villain. I want to hear how Mickey and Greg think of this idea. Priority. You touched on carbon footprint, Greg, when it comes to building the houses. Does it matter, or rather, what is the priority? Your houses being recyclable, carbon footprint friendly versus providing a cheap home in an efficient way for people, for example, their houses being destroyed in a natural disaster. Similarly, Mickey, if the material was not top-notch environmentally friendly, but you're able to provide connectivity, for example, for a few villages, what are your views? Like, how are you prioritizing?
You want something that's sustainable, not just in the sense that it's sustainable to the environment, but also sustainable that you don't have to do a truck roll. You don't have to send more trucks out there because you built something that was degrading or wasn't up to the standard. And I'm sure Greg will say the same thing. There's one thing about building a house or a telecom tower and trying to fit into the sustainable bracket as much as you can. There's another thing, making sure that this infrastructure stays up there for the next 5, 10, 15 years without you having to replace it every 12 months or every 18 months.
Yeah, look, I mean, from our perspective, the climate resilience is first and foremost. We can't, with a clear and ethical conscience, sell a home to somebody who we know is going to be unsafe or is not going to withstand the realities of where the home is built. So if that means that the home needs to come at a premium in order to achieve that. We think that that not only makes good ethical sense, it makes good business sense. No one's going to want to continue to buy homes from on the ground developers if the word gets out that in the last cyclone, 3 of them fell down. So that's not how you get a good reputation in market. So climate resilience is critical to us. Then of course we need affordable homes. It's a key step to financial inclusion. A home has the ability to impact many of the SDG goals. Things like educational outcomes, health outcomes. Being able to live in a home with reliable electricity, running water, pollution facilities, really has a number of different impacts. And I think then, and I mean, it's always hard to prioritize these things, then we can obviously look at the climate, the nature of the material and the climate impact that we're making when building it. The advantage, I suppose, of a home is that if built correctly, it should withstand decades, right? And it should be within that family's pass on from generation to generation. So we can, to some extent, afford to maybe build things that are going to be long-standing, as long as they're climate resilient, as long as they're affordable, even if, maybe they're using some more of the traditional building techniques, say like concrete, which we all know is not very environmentally friendly, but is an affordable way to build a home.
Yeah, I think one thing that should be discussed is inclusion, digital inclusion. That's the most sustainable thing that a human actually can have. Without digital inclusion, how do you sustain economies? How do you sustain human interaction, relationships? We talk about the world being online, but actually it's not. We talk about this global village that is the internet. It's not a global village, it's half a village. So you have to find a balance, right, of what is sustainable, of what's of great importance. And then if you take it a step further, the materials that we use, you need to make sure they're safe. We need to make sure they're healthy. And if we start to poison the people around us because we're using sustainable materials, that's not good either. So there's a balance needs to be found, and I agree it needs to be found quite soon. And I think that most companies should be focused on this sustainability, but they shouldn't be in a position where you're sacrificing one for the other and actually not achieving your goal. So it's not about radicalism. It's more about actually understanding what moving forward is the best and most sustainable in all aspects for us as a world and a society to grow.
Exactly.
Sustainability.
Sorry, do you have anything to add with that?
I'll just very quickly say, I think all too often we look at very superficial metrics. Oh, it's got a solar panel on the roof. It's green, and we all hear about these examples time and time again where, your EV is actually far less sustainable than maybe, keeping your car on the road or whatever. I think I'll try to think of a better example, but
that's the perfect example. Everyone thinks if I drive an EV, it's actually more sustainable for the environment. Where's that power coming from to charge your EV?
Exactly, right. So that's a great example. If you're recharging your car in a country that has very dirty electricity, you're no better off than just driving a diesel.
Worse. The governments are losing more for subsidizing it. The source of electricity is coming from the same place, from coal, from fossil fuels, from wherever it may be, and actually it's leading to worse. All to jump onto a hype. It reminds me of the hype of blockchain, or in its own way, right? And you've got people cashing in on this sustainability, and that's not okay either. You've got people saying, okay, well, we fulfilled these amount of goals, the SDG goals, therefore please give us funding of X, Y, and Z. And then it's the only reason they've done it is so sustainability has to be sustainable, right? Yeah. And I know, Greg, you and I have had a few conversations about this, but that's the truth. It has to be sustainable.
Yeah. Just to jump in on there, guys, when you mentioned about has to be sustainable, I think that's where blockchain is really transformative to bring that transparency to the supply chain and accountability. Like Fred was mentioning, this thinking about focus of scope 3 emissions. If everyone here has this long-term view of development, right, of building a business that's not just profit driven, but people, planet before profit, then we use the tech for good. And just to touch on the EV example, where did the batteries come from? Is that the car maker's responsibility to make sure that everything is good for all,
Yeah, follow the path and then see actually what is most sustainable, what is not, and do your best, right, to to leave and make a better world, but be sensible about it. There's sustainable, and then there's radical sustainable, and it's a big difference.
What do you mean by radically sustainable? Can you give some examples?
Yeah, I mean, the tens of thousands of companies that acquire funding from governments, United Nations, and other people, and put it in their pockets to grow their own companies in the claims to be sustainable, right? Where actually they're not. They're just jumping onto a bandwagon. Like we say, again, I refer to crypto and the blockchain space. We saw so many companies, 99% of them out there, who have got some potentially great tech, but they're just adding crypto or adding blockchain to their stack in order to be able to go out and raise money. Simply, and that isn't sustainable, and that's what I mean by radicalist. I don't mean people that are standing at the rainforest saying trees shouldn't be cut down. I'm one of those people, right? But I don't think that we should be pushing an agenda in order to further people's pockets or make companies richer. Sustainability. There has to be some kind of level-headedness about this.
Behind the sustainability and impact aspect of what you're doing to the Cardano community, how do you envision Cardano ecosystem and our community can contribute and be part of the change that you're driving?
I think Cardano Foundation have done a really good job in educating people over the last 2 to 3 years on the sustainability of the blockchain. But ultimately, mass adoption is what is needed of the Cardano blockchain in order for actually to be sustainable and effective. But I think in general, our community, the community in the Cardano ecosystem, we're kind of more aware. I don't say we're woke. I definitely don't want to use that phrase, but we're definitely more aware than others of what's going on. And we have a different kind of mindset. You know, Empower chose to build on Cardano because of its beliefs, its mission in Africa. We chose in the beginning of our relationship with IOHK to build on Cardano. But I think that what needs to really happen is more ecosystems need to work with each other. And that's the vision of Charles, I guess, is the multi-chain, right? Is to be able to interoperability so that everyone can leverage. And as more usage of these blockchains become viable, because right now it's so small, but as they become more viable, then it becomes super important. But what is the start of everything? It's education, it's people, right? It's us, it's our mindset, it's delivering something that we wish. And the law of attraction, I guess, is probably one of the things that most people could point to here. But in reality, our community, I think, is one of the greatest communities when it comes towards sustainability.
Yeah, I mean, I must echo that sentiment. As always, it still surprised me. We'll put out a piece of content that talks to the impact that we've made. And I'm not convinced that if we put out that same piece of content to other communities, we get the same level of engagement and positivity and, you know, respect for that aspect of what we're doing. You know, we talk about being an Earn with Impact project. We've said it many times, we're not a charity, we're not a non-profit, we're trying to create a sustainable business. But with that, part of that reward that anyone who participates in our project gets is knowing that they made an impact. It's amazing how often we see our community really value that impact as well. And that is important because it's key to our business, it continues to motivate the team, and it actually means that we're more likely to be sustainable ongoing. And I mean, just to talk a bit to kind of what can Cardano do, or what can Cardano as a project do? I spent the vast majority of my life, when you really lived in Europe for the last 2.5 years, living in South Africa and, you know, traveling a lot for work across the continent. And what amazes me time and time again is how many obvious use cases there are for blockchain across the continent. You know, I'm still 2.5 years in, blown away when I send some money from one of my bank accounts in Europe to another one that it arrives immediately. It's like still innovative and novel to me that this happens, because even if I send money to 2 of my bank accounts in South Africa, it can take 2-3 working days. You know, the fact that in most of the markets we go to, there's nothing that represents a credit score. You know, digital identities and, you know, recording payments, you know, that can become the de facto credit score. You know, and that's not even touching on things like how much mistrust there is across the continent, how much a trustless, verifiable system can add value there. So, you know, I think I agree the Cardano Foundation has done an amazing job of attracting the right kind of people into the space. I'm really excited for the ecosystem.
Stakeholder engagement, Greg, right? I got Alex here on the phone, you know, he's on the line as well. That's what Cardano Foundation has done really well, right? Is the stakeholder engagement. They educating, talking about the issues, driving towards a more sustainable future. It's got to start somewhere. And I think that Cardano Foundation needs some big kudos, particularly for this.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Mickey. Thanks, Greg. And I actually want to kind of give a framework about a little bit about what we do and how we consider impact and sustainability at the foundation, because typically we've been speaking a lot about blockchain for sustainability during this course. So really using the technology to unlock sustainable value and shared value for people all around the world. But we kind of take a step before that at the foundation. We look at sustainability from these three strategic pillars that we focused on. So yes, education, adoption, and then the operational resilience of sorts. And I think one point that we touched on very much earlier is on the other side. So the sustainability of the blockchain, right? The ability for a blockchain to meet the current needs and future needs without compromising on either
We've lost you.
Of builders. Oh, can't hear me. Can you guys hear me now?
You need World Mobile. Shameless plug.
Yeah, I'll DM you on that one, Vicky. But essentially looking at the sustainability of the blockchain itself, right, and its ability to keep on delivering these critical services for some of the applications like World Mobile, like Empower, and many others in the ecosystem. And one way that we look at sustainability at the foundation from an educative point of view is the Global Impact Challenge, right? So every year what we try to do using the Cardano Summit as a platform is to launch with a partner an innovative use case that uses the Cardano blockchain for a positive impact. And typically that will rely on the Cardano community to make it a success. Now, in the first instance, we had the Global Impact Challenge in 2021 with Veritri, and there was really about proving a concept that you could use native assets to create a conscious consumer experience where somebody that would give to plant a tree would be able to see a planting certificate of the tree and have this entire value flow from giver to planter and then back again. What we did last year, and this is still an ongoing project, is we partnered up with the Swiss representative for the UN Refugee Agency, and they're piloting a stake pool as a means to draw resources towards the cause of refugees. And we've seen them interact with many, many different NFT projects in the Cardano community, and they're actually looking at a lot of other ways to plug in and to connect and to adopt this wonderful technology through some of the needs that they have. And of course, we'll be looking at how can we find a different partner, a different use case, and a different way to engage the Cardano community at the Cardano Summit in 2023. And it's a big part of my job to go and find that, and really looking forward to that. And I saw a question about, does CF and World Mobile and Empower work? Do they work together? Do we work with other projects? And I think the main role of the foundation is to connect our projects with meaningful opportunities. Beyond the education bit is about connecting and making sure that we can let stakeholders that we engage know that we're not going to solve everything, but then we have projects in the community that can help them to find solutions to some of their challenges. And again, this is some of what we've seen already with the UNHCR project, where NFT collections and artists have come to the UNHCR, proposed this particular drop because it's relevant to that specific stakeholder in a certain way. So really, blockchain for sustainability is fantastic, but the technology needs to keep on delivering over time. And these are questions around environmental sustainability, like what is the carbon footprint of the Cardano blockchain from scope 1 to 3. We have a group within the community that's looking to develop a methodology for that. And we try to find ways to help them. But of course, there's a really important conversation around governance and decentralization to make sure that Cardano as a blockchain, as a techno-social system can persist and exist over the future. So yeah, it's been a really cool conversation. I see Mickey's about to drop off.
I've got to drop off, but I very much enjoyed myself. Thank you very much, everybody. Dumpling, as always, you do a fantastic job. Alex, I'll be speaking to you soon. Greg, let's meet up soon. And very nice to meet you both, Cole and Rosalie. And Elise, of course.
Thank you,
Mickey.
Cheers.
thank you for being here.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Alex. We got a question. Does the foundation actually do anything? I think Alex just answered that question very well. We don't have a lot of time left, so let's read some audience questions. Exciting. Greg, hope you're ready for this one.
Vicky left me for the tough part. Let's see what I can do.
Can you explain the climate-friendly approach for the Marasa project and maybe give a short explanation of the project?
Yeah. So yeah, for anyone listening in who's maybe not familiar with the Marasa project, it's a big undertaking that we announced at last year's Cardano Summit. It's a partnership between the local government within Beira, Mozambique, supported by the Dutch government to ultimately develop a piece of land that has will have ultimately 25,000 homes in it. Now, just to manage expectations, this is real-fi, so it's going to be a long-term project. But obviously, we're busy working on phase one, and already the land's been prepared and the servitudes have been installed, which is important. One of the key things we're obviously having to tackle with the Marasa development, when you think of 25,000 homes, that's a small town, right? In the Netherlands, when actually be such a small town would be quite meaningful. So we really need to think about how that's laid out, but most importantly, what is the materials that we use to deliver on that project? And of course, as we touched on at the start of the conversation, how do we make it climate resilient? How do we make it affordable? And how do we build it in a sustainable way? And so that's where things like, for example, the Hempcrete project we've done is playing into that. So how realistic is it for us to be able to use that material? And there again, it's a journey, because it doesn't help. The Hempcrete currently can be sourced in South Africa, but it doesn't help. When we talk about really thinking about sustainability holistically, it doesn't help to put a bunch of hempcrete blocks on a truck and drive them from South Africa to Mozambique. That's not sustainable. It would look good, it would sound good if we built a small town out of hempcrete, but it wouldn't be sustainable. So that means trying to build things like the hempcrete on site and getting government approvals for that, etc., etc. So that's just one avenue that we're exploring. I mean, ultimately, the idea would be to do this obviously in phases, to try and include as much of the sustainable building approaches as we can upfront, understanding that we also need to deliver. So it might mean that the first house is unsustainable as house, 25,000, especially given that that might be in 10 years' time, and I would hope that there's much better building technology as we tackle this problem more deeply. So yeah, in short, part of what we're doing, part of why that project is, I suppose, taking its time to get off the ground, is testing those different metrics. And yeah, again, when you plan out something like a project of that size, you really want to measure twice, cut once. So you want to really make sure you've got all the stakeholders in line. You want to make sure that you've got all the necessary regulation, and that you're not thinking only about, say, phase one or a couple of hundred or 1,000 homes, but how does that all piece together? And how do other services come into play? A place like an environment like that needs a park, it needs schools, it needs things like that. So I hope I've answered the question. I'm going into more detail maybe, but I know we're short on time.
Thank you, Greg. I think you brought a very important point. For real-fi projects, we need to set the right expectations. It's not built in a day. It's not even built in a year. It actually takes a lot of time, and very appreciative of projects like Empower, WMT, being on the ground, still building in the bear market. And also shout out to your following and also to your communities. I believe they are giving you a lot of support. And apart from the financial support, more importantly, is really spreading the message, boosting the morale, and believing in the mission. That's how we can do this all together. Yeah. One of the final questions. Greg, you have something to add?
Oh no, I just wanted to, Bruno from our team once said this, and it really resonates with me. Unfortunately, there's no test net in RealFi, so there's no write a bunch of code, pen test it, make sure it's ready, and push it live. Mickey will tell you,
No, you can't do a testnet for a house. I suppose that would be disastrous.
Exactly, you got to put the aerostat in the air and see if it works. And that's difficult. I mean, once you've got one that works, you need to put 5, and then once you put 5, you need to put 10, and you need to cover the whole continent. And the same with the homes, But anyway, I'll let you get to your final question before I use up all the time.
So is anyone from our panel, like Raz, Cole, do you have anything before we end the space? Maybe you have a question for Greg.
How about you, Cole? Do you have any questions for Greg, or perhaps we could share a bit more news?
I don't have anything on the top of my head, honestly, but we could quickly share some news. We do have an NFT launching in partnership with NMaker in the next couple of days. And something really special about this NFT, I saw someone actually raised a question, do the sustainable development goals actually matter, or do they have a connection really to anything? And the reason why I think when starting Sustainable Data, looked at the Sustainable Development Goals first, because 193 different countries and states across the globe look at this framework and are partnered with the UN. And something so great about this NFT drop is that there's 169 sub goals for all the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And for a special edition, we're actually launching 169 different NFTs to represent those sub goals of the Sustainable Development Goals. And those sub goals break down so many different aspects of each SDG. So that's something really cool that's coming up. And then also we'll have a collection for anyone. So an opportunity for anyone to purchase a cheap book and get access to all this content and the amazing work we've done with the Cardano Impact Report.
How about you, Greg? Anything to share with us? Exciting news, announcements before we end the call?
I'm not going to steal the limelight from the guys. We obviously moving quickly in kind of not only on the Maratha project, but obviously looking at some other partners across the continent. So once we have something concrete, we'll obviously share that with our community and share with the broader Cardano ecosystem. We're quite focused on, and this is actually something we learned from the World Mobile guys, and Andrew in particular, best to speak when signatures I's are dotted and T's are crossed. And you actually, as a RealFi project, have something real to showcase. We're not in the pump and dump business. So speculation or talking about things is not nearly as impactful as, here we go, there's the signature and this thing's happening.
And respect that. Alex, would you like to say something on behalf of the CF before we end this session?
Yeah, of course. I think we're really excited to see how purpose-driven the Cardano community remains. After a lot of initial years of having this purpose, it still keeps it in 2023 in a bear market, and it keeps building and delivering, and that's really inspiring to be a part of all of that. And of course, encouraging projects to reach out to us with their ideas. Maybe we can help out with that, or connect you to the right person. I think maybe a very direct and immediate way some people can get involved in the ecosystem. They have a little bit more than 24 hours to make a proposal for an NFT collection that would be aligned to the summit in Dubai this year. And the NFT collection is linked to social impact. And of course, this might be something interesting for you, Cole and Raz, as part of the 169 targets that we need to achieve by, I think, 2030. So the clock's ticking, and we have, I think, less than 7 years to get there. Hopefully we do. So thanks so much to everybody and to Dumpling for hosting the space.
Thank you. And just to follow on to what you said, Alex, I think combined together with the impactful work and inspirational work you guys are doing at the CF, together we have all the ingredients necessary, to build this truly equitable and sustainable world for all. And like you said, Greg, there's nothing better than just saying that showing that, and letting the evidence speak for itself. And I think that's what inspires and encourages me. And this is an example of that. The more we talk to each other and broadcast the message out, the more people can believe that it's not all pump and dump and scam and all the negative FUD out there. So thank you to all of you for everything.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice rest of your day and keep building. Don't lose your seed phrase. I always say that.
Thanks, Dumpling. Good advice.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Dumpling.
Bye-bye.